Who the hell invited this guy? No one did, so get out. Harrison's loud voice echoed through the upscale restaurant. Tonight was our department's annual year-end party. Why did I have to come all the way here just to be treated like this? I was beyond angry. I was in shock. As I stood there, dumbfounded, Harrison threw even harsher words at me. Don't just stand there. Leave already. Can't you see you're bothering everyone? Just as I was about to leave, doing exactly as Harrison told me, someone stepped in and saved me. And soon, Harrison's face turned pale and he collapsed on the spot. My name is Anthony. I'm 23 years old. I was born into an ordinary family and went to college. College life was smooth sailing. I made lots of friends and had a great time every day. But dark clouds started to loom over my life in my senior year. As the final stretch of my fun student life approached, I began job hunting. I was sure I'd land a job in no time, so I took a laid-back approach to job searching. But no matter how many interviews I went to, I kept getting rejected. It was because the economy was in a slump. It was the so-called employment ice age. Unaware of that reality, I continued to apply to companies, only to face one rejection after another. As panic set in, a savior appeared. That savior was my father. He had been working for a major company for 30 years, a seasoned veteran. He had climbed the ranks to become a department manager and was always busy with work. Because he left early in the morning and returned late at night, I only saw him for a few minutes each day. But one day, with a serious look on his face, he said, "If you want, you can work at my company." My father was a quiet man who rarely spoke to me, so I was surprised. But more than anything, I was grateful. Taking him up on his offer, I decided to join his company. Though it was technically a nepotism hire, I still had to pass an interview. I was nervous, but I was preparing for the interview. My father gave me detailed advice on interview tips and told me a lot about his company. It was the first time since childhood that we had talked this much. It made me happy, and I felt genuinely glad that I had chosen to work at his company. Thanks to my father, I aced the interview and received a job offer. My mother was just as overjoyed as my father. All that was left was to wait for the induction ceremony. This book will be useful for you before you start working. My father said that and gave me a few books as a gift. Grateful, I read them eagerly as I waited for the big day. I thought my father would continue to be a great mentor, guiding me in my career. But fate had other plans. While I was in class at college, my phone kept vibrating. It was my mother. Since I was in the middle of a lecture, I couldn't answer right away. When I called her back, she was crying on the other end. Sensing something was terribly wrong, I pressed her for an explanation. She told me that my father had collapsed at work and had been rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. I immediately headed for the hospital. When I arrived, I hurried to my father's hospital room, but I was too late. There he was, already cold and lifeless. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. No tears came. How had this happened? Through her sobs, my mother told me it was a stroke. He kept calling your name until the very end. At that moment, tears came rushing out uncontrollably. Weren't you supposed to teach me everything about work from now on, Dad? There were still so many things I wanted to talk to you about. For a while, I couldn't do anything. I was completely lost. Then, one day, I found my father's journal at home. He had always been meticulous, writing in it every day without fail. My name appeared frequently in the pages. He had written about how happy he was when I was accepted into his company, even if it was through a connection. Despite his busy schedule, he had always been watching over me. That realization made me incredibly happy. Clutching the journal tightly, I made a vow to live strongly in his place. A few weeks later, the day of the company induction ceremony arrived. I was getting ready for the event. Wearing a slightly oversized suit, I checked myself in the full-length mirror. With teary eyes, my mother said, "You really look just like your father. That suit suits you well." Today was the start of my journey. Wanting to draw some strength from my father, I had decided to wear his suit. As I put it on, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. With my mother seeing me off, I left the house full of enthusiasm. I was going to become an outstanding employee, just like my father. At that moment, my heart was filled with hope. The company was on the 5th floor of a high-rise building. Nervous, I stepped inside. As I waited for the elevator, a stern-looking man glared at me. "Are you one of the new employees?" A man suddenly spoke to me. Startled, I replied, "Yes, it's nice to meet you." The man studied me intently before saying, "If you're a new employee, don't use the elevator. Take the stairs." I couldn't believe my ears. Was he seriously telling me to walk up 5 flights of stairs? It felt absurd, but as a newcomer, I couldn't argue. Resigned, I bowed slightly to him and took the stairs. As I climbed, I silently prayed that he wouldn't end up being my boss. Out of shape, I was gasping for air by the time I reached the 5th floor. Inside, the other new hires had already gathered. They all stood in pristine suits, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Blending in, I waited as well. Then I noticed one of the new employees approaching me. He looked familiar. As I racked my brain, he spoke up. "Aren't you Anthony from my university?" "I'm Sebastian. I'm glad to see someone I know." Sebastian. Now that I thought about it, I remembered taking the same class with him in college. "Sebastian, so you're working here too? That makes me feel a lot better." At my words, Sebastian beamed with happiness. Having someone I knew here was a huge relief as a new employee. I felt even more excited about working at this company. Just then, a man appeared in front of us new hires. I gasped as I recognized him. It was the same intimidating man I had met at the elevator. He began his speech. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our company. I am Harrison, the department manager of the System Development Division." Harrison. The System Development Division was the department my father had managed. So this man was my father's successor. Harrison glanced at me with a sharp glare before continuing, "You all must have studied hard to get into this company, and I expect you to demonstrate that same effort here. Of course, some people got in through unfair means like nepotism. But anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do. Give it your best." He was clearly talking about me. So to Harrison, getting hired through family connections was unfair? I stood frozen in shock. Then the department assignments were announced. I had hoped to work in the system development division as I had studied system development in college. But after what had just happened, I wasn't sure I could handle working under Harrison. I silently prayed that I wouldn't be placed in his department. I nervously looked at the paper that showed my assignment, and it said System Development Department. To my surprise, I was assigned to the System Development Department. I loved computers, and this was the job I had always dreamed of. So why did I feel so uneasy? What would my father think if he saw me like this? I got assigned to system development too. Unlike me, Sebastian looked genuinely excited. All I could do was give him a forced smile. I was too anxious about the difficult days ahead. The new hires were then sent off to their assigned departments. I walked toward the System Development Division alongside Harrison and Sebastian. The System Development Department is responsible for developing the company's systems using computers. I have loved working with computers since I was a child, and I studied programming in college. My father taught me a lot about computers. Thanks to him, I grew even more interested in computers and became more knowledgeable. I wanted to do a job like my father's in system development, so I applied for this department. The division was a space filled with desks, the sound of keyboards clacking nonstop across the floor. It was an overwhelming sight. As I took it all in, Harrison said something shocking. Sebastian, I heard you were an excellent student in college. I have high expectations for you. Anthony, you really look just like your father. That stubborn glare of yours. You don't seem like you'll be any good at this job. I was shocked by Harrison's words. Even Sebastian looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. How could a department manager say something like that to a subordinate? Harrison then raised his voice so the entire division could hear. Everyone listen up. We have a new employee joining us today, Sebastian. Make sure to welcome him. All eyes turned towards Sebastian. Wait. Was he not going to introduce me? Even the senior employees looked puzzled as they glanced at me. Just as I was processing what was happening, Harrison let out a smug chuckle. Oh, my bad, my bad. I almost forgot. We have one more newbie. This here is Anthony, the former manager's useless son. He probably won't be any good at his job, so feel free to dump all the grunt work on him. Something inside me boiled over like magma about to erupt. The senior employees whispered among themselves as they glanced at me. Still in shock, I barely had time to process everything before Harrison called over another employee named Keith. Keith will be your mentor. Keith, make sure to properly train Sebastian. He's an important new employee. Oh, and as for Anthony, just do whatever with him. Keith let out a laugh. Understood. With that, he led Sebastian and me to our desks. Sebastian, let's work hard together. Keith completely ignored me, speaking only to Sebastian. Then, he handed Sebastian a thick manual. This is the updated training manual. It's much clearer than the old one. If you ever get confused, just check this. Sebastian immediately started studying the manual intently. Why was I being treated like this? What had I done to deserve this? I sat down at my desk in confusion. Just then, the man sitting at the desk next to mine, a senior employee in his 40s, spoke to me in a hushed voice. His name was Marcus. Don't let it get to you. Harrison was jealous of your father. Huh? I didn't understand what he meant. Jealous? As I stood there confused, Marcus looked around and explained various things to me. My father and Harrison joined the company at the same time, but my father was promoted faster and became the head of the system development department. However, Harrison was only able to reach the position of section manager. When my father was alive and serving as department head, Harrison felt frustrated because he couldn't go against him. Now he's taking out his long-held resentment on me, his son. After hearing Marcus' explanation, I understood the situation. That's why Harrison was treating me so harshly. Everyone in this department is just trying not to get on Harrison's bad side. Things might be tough for you, but don't let him break you. At the time, I didn't fully grasp what he meant by tough situation. But I was about to find out soon enough. Keith was completely focused on training Sebastian, explaining things to him step by step. I had nothing to do, so all I could do was watch Marcus work at the desk next to me. Marcus operated the computer with practiced ease. I wanted to start working too, so I reached out to turn on the computer at my desk. The moment my finger touched the power button, Harrison suddenly shouted at me. Hey, don't touch that computer without permission. What if you leak confidential information? Leak confidential information? What the hell was he talking about? I couldn't hold back and responded, I don't even know any confidential information and I have no intention of leaking anything. I was just turning on the computer. Harrison glared at me and let out an exaggerated sigh. You are useless. There is absolutely nothing you can do here. Just sit there and make sure you don't get in anyone's way. I was beyond fed up with him. He might think that he couldn't get promoted because of my father, but I can only see it as a result of his own personality flaws. I had no choice but to sit there and watch time crawl by while Marcus worked. No one else in the department said anything. They all pretended not to see what was happening. For the first time, I realized that this was the difficult situation Marcus had been talking about. At last, the workday came to an end. As soon as the clock hit closing time, I let out a deep sigh and started packing up my things. Just then, Marcus turned to me. How about a drink? Consider it a little welcome party. He mimed drinking a beer. I figured if I went straight home, it'd just stew in frustration. So I decided to take him up on his offer. The three of us, Sebastian, Marcus, and I, left the office and headed to a nearby bar. As soon as we sat down, Marcus ordered beers for me and Sebastian. We gratefully accepted them, and the three of us clinked our glasses in a toast. Marcus chugged his beer in one go. I was surprised by how quickly he drank. I'm so sick of Harrison. He has no idea how much your father contributed to the system development division. Your dad actually listened to his subordinates. Harrison doesn't even pretend to care about what we say. Marcus seemed to have a low tolerance for alcohol and started complaining to me while slightly tipsy. Apparently, my father had been a kind and thoughtful leader. Hearing that made me feel proud. I wish my father were still alive and the head of the system development department. I let out a deep sigh. Anthony, your father must have been an amazing person. I wish I could have met him. Sebastian murmured. Then Marcus suddenly turned serious and looked at me. Everyone's afraid of Harrison, so they don't say anything. But honestly, I think a lot of them want to talk to you. That's how much respect they had for your father. Sebastian nodded and added, I want to help you too, Anthony. But I'm scared of Harrison. I'm really sorry. He looked down, ashamed. It's okay. No one can stand up to him in a situation like that. That feeling alone was enough for me. Just knowing that there were people who cared about me was enough to give me strength. In this vast company, my only allies were Marcus and Sebastian. I was deeply grateful to them. The next day, I arrived at work with a fresh mindset. Talking with Marcus and Sebastian had restored some of my motivation. As soon as I sat at my desk, Harrison entered the office. The previously lively department fell into silence. As soon as Harrison looked at me, he said something harsh again. Oh, you're here again? You can quit anytime, you know. His words froze me in place. Marcus sighed beside me. I lowered my head. Why couldn't Harrison say anything but insults? I was so sick of him. I couldn't touch my computer without getting yelled at. What was I even supposed to do? Once again, I spent the day just watching Marcus work. Several days passed like that. My motivation to go to work was nearly gone. Then, something big happened in the office. Keith, who was in charge of a major system development project set for delivery that day, had somehow lost all of the project data. And since there was no backup, the entire office fell into chaos. Harrison panicked. Hey, this project is worth $1 million. If we lose it, I won't get off easy either. I'm so sorry. I'll redo it as fast as I can. Keith kept apologizing over and over. Harrison ignored him and spoke to Marcus instead. Marcus, you can do this, right? Help Keith fix it. His desperate eyes locked onto Marcus. Marcus looked conflicted but nodded. Yes, I'll do my best. Since the project had to be delivered by the end of the day, Marcus started working frantically. Unable to hold back, I turned to Marcus and said, "Can I help with anything? I can at least build a system." Marcus looked at me in surprise but quickly told me to help. I quickly powered on my computer. As expected, Harrison immediately noticed and shouted across the office. I told you not to touch the computer, didn't I? Even in this urgent situation, that was what he was worried about? I was speechless. Before I could say anything, Marcus raised his voice, refusing to back down. Harrison, we don't have time for this. If Anthony doesn't help, we won't make the deadline. Harrison looked startled by Marcus' outburst. Still, he quickly retorted, then just ask someone else to help. He glanced around the office, but it was end-of-month closing day. Every senior employee was already scrambling to meet their deadlines and make deliveries to clients. There was no one else available. Harrison let out a long sigh. Fine, but if you screw up, I won't forgive you. Not that I expect much from you anyway. Just do whatever grunt work you can to finish this as soon as possible. With that, he stomped back to his desk. Marcus handed me part of the project. I got to work immediately. Within minutes, I had completed my portion. When I told Marcus, his eyes widened in surprise. He handed me another part of the project. Again, I finished it quickly. Piece by piece, I worked through the project until, before I knew it, we were done. Marcus stared at me astonished. "What the hell? Who are you?" I laughed. "I'm just a regular new hire." Marcus burst into laughter as well. Keith successfully delivered the project to the client, and both Marcus and I felt relieved. Just as Marcus and I were sinking deep into our chairs, exhausted, Keith came over and handed us hot coffee. For the first time, his usual cold expression was gone. Instead, he looked grateful. "Thank you so much for today. I haven't even trained you yet, and you still managed to get the job done. I'm seriously impressed, and I'm sorry for how I treated you before." Keith bowed deeply. I was stunned by his sudden apology, but at the same time, I felt genuinely happy. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I glanced around and noticed that even the other senior employees were smiling at me. Harrison, on the other hand, looked furious. After that day, I slowly started receiving more work, but at the same time, Harrison's harassment only got worse. "Anthony, you're too slow, just like your father was." No matter what I did, he always found a way to bring my father down. Each time, I bit my lip, holding back my anger. But not everything was bad. Ever since that incident, Keith, though still cautious of Harrison, started teaching me the job. Even the other senior employees seemed a bit kinder toward me. For the first time, I really wanted to succeed as a developer. 8 months passed. Winter had arrived and the city was covered in frost. Harrison's treatment of me hadn't changed. As the year-end approaches, work is getting busier. I focused all my energy on completing my assigned tasks. Then suddenly, Harrison's voice boomed across the office. Harrison looked somewhat excited. "Listen up, everyone. We're having a huge year-end party with another department tonight. Make sure you all come." He looked thrilled as he walked out of the office. It's the season for year-end parties. As I was thinking that, Sebastian turned to me. "You're coming, right, Anthony?" I hesitated. If I went, Harrison would probably just spend the whole time insulting me. Did I really want to deal with that? Sensing my hesitation, Marcus grinned and said, "It's all on the company's tab. Eat and drink as much as you want. I'm going, so you should too." Encouraged by Marcus' words, I decided to attend the year-end party. After finishing work, I prepared to head to the venue with the others. This year's year-end party will be held together with other departments, so Harrison has booked a slightly expensive high-end restaurant. Although I was a bit nervous about what Harrison might say to me, I was excited about going to a high-end restaurant for the first time. Just as I was about to leave, Harrison suddenly approached me and shoved a stack of documents into my arms. I stared at him in confusion. With a smirk, he said, "Make sure you finish summarizing these before you come to the party." It was already past office hours. While the other employees were heading to the venue, what the hell was he talking about? My head filled with rage. Without saying a word, Harrison handed me a huge stack of documents as if shoving them at me. Then, without even looking back, he headed to the year-end party venue. I stood there, stunned. What a self-centered manager. I'll help you. Let's finish this quickly. He took some of the documents from my hands and immediately got to work. Moments later, Keith and Sebastian walked over. I'll help too. Give me some of those. The more of us, the faster we'll be done. Thanks to them, we finished in no time. All right, let's go. The four of us left the office together and headed to the party. The restaurant had an impressive entrance that exuded luxury. Marcus led the way as we stepped inside. Half of the venue had been reserved for our company. Employees from the system development and accounting departments were already drinking and laughing. As soon as Harrison spotted us, he gestured for us to come over. Marcus, Keith, and Sebastian, come over here and have a seat. The three of them took their seats, but there was no seat for me. Marcus whispered, "Come over here," but there was physically no space left. As I stood there, unsure of what to do, Harrison suddenly started laughing. Then he dropped a bombshell. Who invited him? No one did. Go home. The employees from the accounting department, unaware of the situation, burst into laughter. I felt my face burn with humiliation. Even outside the office, Harrison had no problem looking down on me. Enough. I just wanted to leave. Forcing my body to move, I turned to go. But before I could take a step, Harrison twisted the knife deeper. Don't just stand there, hurry up and leave. You're bothering everyone. A wave of sadness crashed over me. Why did I deserve this? Just as I was about to walk away, someone called out to me. I turned around. A kind-looking man stood there. I heard everything just now. Your behavior is absolutely disgraceful. Watching it made me sick. Harrison's face twisted at the man's words. And who are you to say that? This has nothing to do with you. Step aside. The man doesn't back down, even against Harrison's strong words. Oh, you don't recognize me? That's disappointing. The man looks shocked. At that moment, I finally realized who he was. That voice. You're Mr. Mitchell from Mitchell Industries, aren't you? Thank you for always doing business with us. When I said that, Mr. Mitchell gently nodded. Yes, the man was none other than Mr. Mitchell, our business partner. I had spoken with Mr. Mitchell over the phone several times to confirm work details, so I recognized his voice. Mr. Mitchell looked at me intently and said, You're Kevin's son, aren't you? You really resemble your father. The way you value business partners is just like him. Your father never forgot the faces of the company presidents he worked with. The room fell into complete silence. Harrison quickly apologized, saying, So you're Mr. Mitchell. I deeply apologize for my rudeness. However, Mr. Mitchell had no intention of listening. I'm sorry, but I can't do business with a company that allows its employees to treat their subordinates like this. From now on, our business relationship is over. Harrison desperately tries to make excuses in response to Mr. Mitchell's words. Excuse me, but Anthony is a completely useless new employee. He was trying to shift all the blame onto me. Mr. Mitchell looked at Harrison with a dismayed expression. There's no point in reasoning with someone like him. At that moment, Mr. Mitchell, I apologize for being late. It was our company's president, Mr. Nicholson. He had come to this restaurant to discuss business with Mr. Mitchell over drinks. What a coincidence. As soon as Mr. Nicholson saw Harrison, he cheerfully said, "So you're having a year-end party here? Sounds great." But his smile quickly faded as he noticed the tense atmosphere. Did something happen? In response to Mr. Nicholson's words, Mr. Mitchell told him everything that had happened here. Mr. Nicholson's expression darkened by the second. The smile from earlier had completely vanished from his face. Harrison, care to explain what's going on? Why are you treating your subordinates so harshly? And of all people, why would you speak so terribly to Anthony? I can't believe this. Well, Anthony only got into this company thanks to his father's connections, but he's completely incompetent. Harrison weakly muttered. Then Mr. Nicholson burst into laughter. Anthony is incompetent? Ha, that's ridiculous. If anything, he might be more capable than you. Huh? Harrison stared at Mr. Nicholson in shock. Anthony is the one who created the entire system development manual for our company. The room buzzed with murmurs, and the senior employees turned their eyes to me in astonishment. Harrison was at a loss for words. A system development manual? That's right. He's an incredibly talented new employee. And yet, you treated him so poorly. Harrison, I'm deeply disappointed in you. Harrison looked as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The truth was, before I officially joined the company, I had some free time, so I studied system development as a way to pass the time. When I saw my father talking about wanting to create a new manual for the system development department, I decided to make one that anyone could read and understand easily. For me, someone who had been tinkering with computers since childhood, creating a manual was an enjoyable way to pass the time. When I showed it to my father, he was impressed. He immediately submitted it to Mr. Nicholson, and it became the official new manual for the company's system development department. The manual I created has been well received by employees for being easy to understand. I felt happy when I saw senior employees reading my manual and saying it was easy to follow. Anthony is an invaluable asset to this company. I won't tolerate any further disrespect toward him. Harrison, prepare yourself. With that, Mr. Nicholson and Mr. Mitchell left the venue. No way. Harrison hung his head and dejectedly walked out of the restaurant, never to return. After the two left, the year-end party venue fell completely silent and no one said a word. Seeing the awkward atmosphere, Marcus took the lead and raised his glass. A toast to Anthony, who created an easy-to-understand manual for the system development department. Hearing Marcus' voice, everyone joined in and the mood brightened again. The senior employees poured drinks for me. I owe so much to your father. He taught me everything about work. As I enjoyed my drink, I got to hear stories about my father, making it a truly wonderful year-end party. As Marcus had mentioned before, the senior employees truly respected my father. I was overwhelmed with pride. I knew from the moment you helped me with my work that you were no ordinary guy. And sure enough, I was right. From now on, maybe you should be the one teaching me. Marcus spoke with a playful expression. Harrison had caused me a lot of trouble, but thanks to that, I felt that the system development department had grown even closer as a team. Later, Harrison was held accountable for his harsh treatment of his subordinates and was demoted, along with a 3-month pay cut. He had no choice but to accept the punishment, and now he's starting over from scratch in the General Affairs Department. Mr. Nicholson personally promised me that the company would ensure better training for managers and implement thorough measures to prevent any future cases like mine. I sincerely hope that Harrison has learned his lesson and will never treat his subordinates that way again. As for me, I'm still working happily in the system development department. Now that Harrison is gone, the atmosphere is brighter and the team is full of energy. Just like my father once did, I will continue to contribute to this company through my work in the system development department.